is Emily Iannielli, and I am a male to female transgender girl. And I'm going to talk about struggles with my son and living with autism. My son was born, well, I met my wife in when did I meet my wife? My memory's going. I met my wife in 1997, in June of 97, and we married early. We had a civil wedding in December of 97, so we courted for 6 months, and we had a civil wedding. My wife is Filipino. I met her through my therapist, where I was going actually for gender dysphoria. I was wanting to transition, go on hormones for becoming a woman. But my therapist persuaded me not to go in that direction and suggested I date. Now, I never dated before, and I was 37 years old. And in my therapy sessions, I would talk about my desire to become a woman. I'm born a man, obviously, a male, but I, in my heart, knew I was female. So most of my discussions were about my desire to transition to become a female. But in some discussions I also discussed that I wanted to have a family. So my therapist took I guess she wanted me to consider meeting a girl rather than transitioning to become one. So I obliged her, and I called the girl that she told me to, and we went on our first date. We had a nice date. We went to see a movie, dinner, and I escorted her home. And like I said, we went out for 6 months, then we got married in a civil wedding. And then we had a church wedding in September of 98, September 12th. When we married civilly, that's when we decided to have sex. And I was a virgin. That was my first experience having sex. I was 37. And 2 months later, my wife said she's pregnant. And I was shocked. And it was my first time having sex. And she said she's pregnant. So I didn't know what to think. I was elated, but I wasn't financially prepared. I was still living at home with my dad and my wife. And now we were expecting a baby. My mom already was gone. She passed. So it was just my dad, myself, now my wife, and our expectant child. And she did her sonograms, and she once asked me, "Do you want to know the baby's sex?" And I said, "Do you know it?" And she said she did. So I said, "If you know, then I should know." So she told me we're having a boy. And I was so happy. Boy or girl, it wouldn't matter, but I was overjoyed. I was thrilled. And I was excited that I was going to be a father. And we were given a due date of December 24th, Christmas Eve. And then I went to work on December 7th, Pearl Harbor Day, and my wife called me at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in the city, working for a small company, and my wife said, "I think I'm ready." And I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm okay, but I need you." So I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I said, "Okay, I'm gonna be coming home now." And she said, "Relax, it's okay. Just come home and I have a meal for you, and then we'll go to the hospital." So I listened and I remained calm, even though I was a nervous wreck, and rushed to Penn Station and took the train home. I was living in Belmore at the time with my dad, like I said, and got home, and she had my meal ready, and she was all packed and ready to go. And so we went to Mercy Hospital in Rockville Center, and she was being prepped, and this was all new to me, but I was very excited, and it was very long. I mean, my wife had to go through labor, and they had to do epidural, and she was in tremendous pain, and she couldn't drink any fluids, so the only thing they could give her were ice chips, and I felt bad. I didn't know what to do. I learned the Lamaze lessons, and every time I tried to help her with that, she'd get mad at me. So I just kind of remained quiet and just stood by her side and just gave her moral support. And it was nerve-wracking. And then the hours went into the midnight, and still nothing. And at times I had to go out of where she was, and I remained in the waiting area until the nurses summoned me to come back. And that happened a few times, and then it was approaching 5 in the morning, and the nurse came rushing to me and summoned me in, and I was looking at all this craziness as my wife was screaming, and the nurses were trying to relax her, and it was chaos. And they were trying to help her push the baby out, and I was like, I looked like I was ready to faint. But I was encouraging her, and nurses and doctor had to take some additional action because our son was not being cooperative, so they had to use forceps and then vacuum suction, eventually he was brought out of her vaginal cavity, and the nurses held our son up and said, "You have a boy." And it was elation. It was the best feeling in the world. I was on cloud nine. And I was thrilled for my wife. She was a mother, and I was a father, and it was the best thing in the world. And I saw the nurses cradling him, putting him in a towel, or cover, or blanket, and putting him in my wife's arms. And it was so amazing how tiny and beautiful he was. And I felt so happy to see my wife with our baby. She was worn out, but she was so happy, and I was so happy, and it was the best thing that I ever witnessed in my whole entire life. And then one of the nurses pulled me over and said, "Do you want to watch me wash your son?" And I said, "Sure." So she brought me over to where they clean the babies, the newborns, and I saw his tiny arms and legs, and it was so precious. I was so touched by my baby, our baby, and it was like a miracle. And I watched her as she was washing our child, our baby, and it was beautiful. And then the nurse swaddled him in a blanket and put him in the nursery, and she suggested that I go home, take a rest, and come back in the afternoon. So I did as she said, and I kissed my wife, and I went home to tell my dad that he was a grandpa for another time. And I took a shower and I went to sleep, and it was very incredible. I was playing music too during my trip home, Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which I fell in love with. Powerful music, and it was very it was like a whole part of the memory of my son's birth, music included. And then I went back to the hospital, and I got to see my son in the nursery, and they had a little hat on his head, because I guess there was some little indent in his head from the trauma of pulling him out. And we got to talk to his pediatrician who arrived at the hospital, and she said that she would see us with the baby in a week, and that we would go on a schedule of required immunizations. So we were briefed on all of that, and they did the circumcision at the hospital, and my wife and our son were in the hospital for 3 days, and It was still winter. He was born on December 8th, and I made sure that we had him safe in his little baby seat, infant seat, and cradled him and brought him home into the house and put him into his little crib. When he was at the hospital, we got some nice hospital photographs of him, and we got a professional photographer to take some photos of him at home. So we got some precious photos as memories, and it was wonderful. It was truly amazing, and I had to go back to the reality of life after a couple of days home and go back to the grind of work. So my wife was home with our child, and everything seemed fine. And we watched him grow from infancy to 6 months to a year old, and then when he was around 2, my wife began to worry because he wasn't being responsive. He didn't make eye contact with her. He didn't respond to her voice. And I wasn't home, I was working, so I didn't really know. But I was concerned because she was with him all the time, and she picked up on all of this. And we decided that we would bring him to he was going to the pediatrician regularly, but on our next appointment with the pediatrician, we spoke about our concerns with him, and she referred us to another doctor who specialized with children that may have autism-related issues. And we were concerned when she mentioned the possibility of autism. Now, I remember reading about autism from a woman in Australia. I'm trying to remember her name. She's well known. She wrote many books. She's gone to university. She's very accomplished. She's an artist. Trying to remember her name. She lives, I think, in Australia, I said. If it comes to me, I'll mention her name. I'm friends with her on Facebook, actually. But we went to the doctor, the specialist, and she did many tests, and she told us that she would go through all of the results and probably have an answer for us within a couple of weeks as to what her determination was in our son's situation. So we were concerned, and I remember when the phone rang and I answered it. It was the voice of the doctor, and she said, "Sit down, I have to tell you something." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Are you familiar with Asperger's?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, your son has Asperger, and I suggest that you enroll him in the early intervention program. New York State offers the program for special needs children." So we listened to her intently, and we immediately got in touch with the contact person upstate for arranging early intervention in the house. And we had several teachers that came over a span of 2 years to give our son speech therapy, physical, OT, occupational therapy, and they would play music for him, and she would speak and show pictures, and all of the women teachers were wonderful with our son, and we felt very happy that he was getting this support. And it was something that I knew he needed, but I also needed some kind of support system, because I was breaking down emotionally, and I was also struggling with my own gender issues, the stress of working, and my son's autism was affecting me here and here, and I started cross-stressing again to deal with the stress, and my wife didn't know about it, but it helped me to deal with all the anxiety I had. But our son, fortunately, was making good progress, but we needed to have support. So my wife and I had decided to go to parent support group meetings for parents who have autistic children, and how to effectively handle the burdens of raising a child with those struggles. And we found that the people that we met through the course of those meetings were very helpful. They provided us with support emotionally, and we felt like we weren't alone, and it gave us an opportunity to share our experiences, which was very helpful. Now my wife is the shy one. I'm shy myself, but I was the one who spoke for us, and discussed our son's situation, and I had tears in my eyes when I spoke about it, because I really didn't know how to help my son. I tried to find the right support system that he needed, but I also felt that we needed a support system too. I was emotionally a mess, and I was worried for my son, and I had this huge pain in my heart because I couldn't help him the way I wanted to. But I knew that we were doing the right thing, so I couldn't you know, I didn't want to beat myself up. I just wanted to make sure that he was being helped and getting the right support. And when he was of age to go to preschool, he went to a BOCES program where he was indoctrinated into a classroom setting. And it was very difficult for us emotionally to let go and see him go to school, but we knew he had to go, and we were very supportive, and we prayed that everything would work out, and our son was very I wouldn't say shy, but he had difficulties in expressing himself. And when he was home, he would tend to isolate and do rituals. He used to have cars that he would line up precisely, and he would spend hours at a time just playing with his cars and lining them up. And he did the same thing with dominoes. And as he got older, he did the same thing with DVDs. He would just line them up by letters and just spend hours at a time doing that. So we knew, based on what the doctors told us, that he had the typical signs of autistic children. And he was speech delayed, so he needed speech therapy. And when we met with the teacher in his preschool, they said Maddie's very gifted, he's very intelligent, very bright,